Thank you so much, Leah, and thank you everyone for being here today. Vicki and I are really excited to share this presentation with you, and then also towards the end, hear any other ideas, suggestions, or questions that everyone has. My name is Naseem Kavari. I'm one of the pediatric gastroenterologists who has a passion for celiac and works here at Stanford Children's. And I'll let Vicki go ahead and introduce herself as well.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. My name is Vicki Gainsberg, and I am a registered dietitian. I work at the University of Chicago Comer Children's Hospital, and I specialize in GI there at the university. And I also do celiac plus an array of other GI disorders regarding nutrition.
So as Leah mentioned, we're going to talk about preparing for safe holiday, gluten-free eating for both Halloween and then the upcoming other holidays that come around the corner. We're going to start with talking about some of the challenges of gluten-free holidays, some tips to navigate these challenges, some Halloween tips and tricks, and then some other holiday tips and tricks. These are all things that people probably already think about, but just to sort of name them out loud. Some of the challenges that our kids go through when they're working on gluten-free holidays could be social isolation or feelings of exclusion, feeling the limits of certain treats that they're allowed to have and not allowed to have. What do we do during classroom celebrations when maybe there aren't gluten-free opportunities or options or less gluten-free options? Um, Maybe peer pressure from other kids or sometimes other adults. Not always knowing where the gluten is hidden, or this feeling of kind of missing out on traditions. So, to navigate these challenges, some of the things that we always like to think about is number one, communication. Please feel comfortable talking to teachers, to school staff, to parents of your children's friends, to just make them aware of your child's dietary restrictions and sometimes even to give them suggestions and ideas if they're open to that. Secondly, educating our children about the importance of their dietary restrictions and teaching them how to identify gluten-free foods and recognize the ingredients that actually contain gluten. Third, thinking about safe treats. So preparing or purchasing safe gluten-free holiday treats in advance. It does sometimes take some thinking and planning, as you all know, and involving your child in the cooking or baking process to make it more fun and engaging. And then lastly, celebrate traditions, make traditions for your child and your family that are special, and adapt holiday traditions and recipes to be gluten-free. So, what are some tips and tricks for a gluten-free Halloween? Number one, no need to be tricked by Halloween candy. You can always read labels. You can check directly with the manufacturer if you're not sure. Keep in mind that due to manufacturing or packaging, sometimes miniatures are not the same as their full-size counterparts. And even if the candy does not have gluten-containing ingredients, just verify that it's gluten-free. I'll hand it off to Vicki.
Okay, thanks. So we're just going to go through a few popular candies that these are just a few questions and the answer is already there. So I'll just go through and we'll kind of see, and maybe you guys can, just kind of think on your own too of what you think is gluten-free or not. So Hershey's. So you look at two different Hershey products here. Kisses. These are a Halloween one that's a vampire with milk chocolate. It's a vampire theme with milk chocolate. And then there's the Hershey, another theme, Fangs, but cookies and cream. So which one of these is going to be gluten-free? So just think about it. And the obvious one would be with the check mark, the vampire one, the milk chocolate, because obviously the other one, cookies and cream. It's obviously it's not going to be gluten-free cookies because it's a normal, regular, mainstream candy. So usually those are regular cookies, but always just turn the back and see. And usually it will say on there the cookies have wheat in them. Next slide.
Sorry, the check mark showed up. Something
I
happened with.
know, I don't know what happened.
I'm sorry
Okay.
about that.
So these are obviously different kinds of Kit Kats. As you know, what Anisine said is there's all these different kinds of candies that come around for the holidays that aren't traditionally around during all other times of the year. So we have to be more careful. Obviously, Kit Kat is one of those products that we know has cookies in it, but these are just different kinds. And so sometimes we're like, maybe these have gluten. But let's see, which Kit Kat is gluten-free here? And let's go to the next slide. Well, this is a trick question because none of those are, because they do have those cookies in them. And even if they're the holiday themed ones, the ingredients still have those same wafer cookies that have wheat in them. But these are other brands of Kit Kat type bars that you can find that are similar to Kit Kats. So here's another great example of reading, it's important to read a label. So this is a very popular candy, the Milky Way. And as you can see, it's kind of small, but in the ingredient list, there's malted barley and there's also wheat flour. So we know that this candy has gluten in it. So the Milky Way candy bar is not gluten-free.
Show it. Let's see.
On the bottom.
Yep, there we go. Malted barley.
And wheat next to it. Yeah.
Wheat flour. Yep.
Yeah. So, and the next slide though, there's again, as we said, wait, hold on. Okay. These Milky Ways are again, Milky Way, but there's a midnight and there's a caramel. And these actually are gluten-free because it does not have the malted barley or the wheat flour in it. So it is just nice, important to read those ingredients on the back to see because they are listed. We have these ingredients have to be listed and they have to state if there is wheat or other types of gluten ingredients in there. So this is really important to just not just assume that some of these things are gluten-free or not gluten-free. So Twizzlers, true or false? Are they gluten-free? It's a candy made with a lot of sugar, but next slide. Unfortunately, Twizzlers have wheat in them. It's one of the main ingredients that helps bind the licorice.
Dryer box allows for safer.
What did he say? Oh. So here, though, however, we do have some other types of licorice that are gluten-free. These are different brands that are common in a lot of different stores. Some of them you might have to find on websites or Amazon, but I have seen a lot of these brands in my local grocery stores here in Chicago. So M&Ms. So, M&Ms nowadays has like tons of different flavors out there for holidays, for Christmas, for different, kinds they come out with. And I really like to just tell families, kids, people that are celiac, that are following gluten-free, that to stick with like the main regular candies, because as you see, there's crispy, there is, I can't even read that one on the bottom, but a lot of these other flavored ones have gluten in them. They have wheat in them or they have malted barley, but the mainstream ones, the peanut, the plain, these are for sure gluten-free and very safe for celiacs. So just stay away from the other crazy flavors that M&M's comes out with all the time.
Like creepy Cocoa Crisp and Cookies and Scream.
Yeah, so that screams gluten anyway. True or false? All candy corn has gluten in it. And I think this is confusing because people think there is gluten in candy corn. However, it's false. There are a lot of brands of candy corn that are gluten-free. So just again, read labels, do your diligence, go online and check manufacturers, but these are some common ones that are gluten-free. So let's see here. So obviously other popular candies that do not contain gluten, you just want to make sure, here's the list. So that, always check with the manufacturer. So this is a great list that every year the Celiac Disease Foundation comes out with each year. There are a lot of similarities every year, but there could be some new products out there. Always, there's always new candy. But this is the most updated one for 2024. And it goes to the different manufacturers and what they recommend. So this is you can go on their website, Celiac Disease Foundation, and actually get this list and, download it, print it out and kind of check to see. But obviously there's a lot of companies that have gluten-free on their label, but some don't. And that doesn't necessarily mean they're not gluten-free. So you want to read the ingredients, check the manufacturer, because a lot of the companies, for instance, Mars and Wrigley, those are like the Snickers, a lot of those common candies you see during trick-or-treating. They might not say gluten-free, but as you see in the little box here, if there is an allergen containing in that ingredient, then it would have to state. So if wheat is in there, if barley's in there, if there's things like that in there, they would list those in the ingredient list. So it's really, really important to read those ingredients.
And feel free to screenshot this one if you haven't already, or go onto the website, Celiac Disease Foundation.
Yeah. And so I just want to also point out, like, so with me, I was, buying all this candy for, as a dietitian, I still buy candy, and, I have lots of kids come around trick-or-treating. I have kids too. For instance, this brand Reese's, which I have here, a little bag of these Reese's, and they are actually for Halloween. They're like a Wilbur type one, like flavor. But actually, all the Reese's, I thought was very interesting, have gluten-free on the label if they are gluten-free. So this is one company that's pretty good about labeling gluten-free. Again, remember, gluten-free is not a label that has to be on something. It's not a mandatory label. It's something that is voluntary by that company. So this company, I would say gluten-free, this brand, these Reese's type, and they actually have them each, and even on the little candies, they say they have a little stamp that says gluten-free. So this is a great company. I wanna put my money toward this company. Okay, you can go to the next slide.
So, oh yeah,
is it me or?
this one is, I think this one is mine again.
Okay.
So in addition to candies, I think we all know that there can sometimes be Halloween parties and other events. And so there's some gluten-free sweet Halloween baking ideas, such as gluten-free pumpkin cookies with like gluten-free flour and decorated with spooky icing designs, Rice Krispie treats using gluten-free rice cereal and marshmallows. And you can make like fun shapes like pumpkins or ghosts. You can make chocolate spider cookies using gluten-free cookies or crackers and topping with chocolate to make spiders, and pretzels for legs. Or gluten-free candy apples, just dipping apples in caramel or chocolate and decorating. And you can very easily just like Google this and see a lot of really great ideas and great designs. And for those that like savory, you can make mummy hot dogs. Just wrap gluten-free hot dogs with strips of gluten-free puff pastry, and then or dough and bake. You can do witch's brew soup, which is basically like a gluten-free soup with vegetables and chicken or pumpkin. You can make monster meatballs, or you can make either ghost pizzas or pumpkin pizzas using gluten-free pizza dough or cutting cheese slices into ghost shapes for sort of spooky toppings.
They also have pans. I'm sorry to interrupt. Like I've seen like little like Halloween pumpkin molds you can use, which are kind of fun too for kids. And just buy like a gluten-free baking mix and make little cupcakes or something or little pancakes in them, but they're shaped in like those like Halloween type, designs, which is fun.
Some of the Halloween tips that we kind of like to suggest, especially for kids who are just starting out. Trick or treat first and then enjoy later so that there's time to look through and figure out what's gluten-free and what's not. For the kids that don't want to give up their candy, you can put the gluten-containing candy somewhere else, and then it's collected later by the Halloween fairy in exchange for something else that is gluten-free or safe for small gifts. We already talked about mini sizes having different ingredients. And then just in case you're going somewhere and you're not sure that there's going to be gluten-free candy, you can pack some for the trip of trick-or-treating. I think most of these we kind of talked about. We talked about purchasing some gluten-free candies or treats that your child can enjoy in advance. You can always go homemade. And then you can also encourage your child to trade or share their gluten-containing candy with siblings or friends in exchange for some gluten-free treats that you've provided. And there's some more ideas for gluten-free baked treats down at the bottom. And Halloween doesn't have to only be about eating. So you could like organize. So this goes back to the tradition idea, right? Organize a glow in the dark treasure hunt in your yard or your house using glow sticks, for example. Have a pumpkin decorating contest, make fun Halloween crafts, have a costume parade or participate in a costume parade in your neighborhood, have a Halloween movie night, or have some Halloween themed games, like bobbing for apples, for example, or a scavenger hunt. So transitioning from Halloween to some of the other holidays that are coming up. Um, we'll talk again about just some general principles, and then Vicki has some really great specific applicable details. So in general, it helps to understand what are the gluten sources in traditional holiday dishes, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Know that you can communicate your dietary needs to hosts or restaurants. So if you're going to somebody else's house, for example, for Thanksgiving or otherwise, say, hey, in advance, can we think together about how I can keep this safe for my family or for myself or for my child? Um, Having some safe gluten-free meal planning and recipes in advance, thinking about what a gluten-free stuffing or gravy alternative could look like, being aware of where cross-contamination could happen and how do we prevent that in a shared kitchen where there might be lots of different things being cooked. And then some ideas for gluten-free dessert options like pies or cookies. So some of the options that we'll sometimes think about are like a gluten-free turkey or tofu turkey. So a traditional turkey rub is gluten-free by default. I'm sorry, turkey is. But if you're using something like a pre-made rub or gravy mix, you guys have already probably figured out that wheat tends to be an amazing thickener. And so oftentimes people will sneak gluten in there to thicken those types of things. So just be aware of that and try different seasonings like herbs or spices or citrus. Um, Similarly, stuffing is often made with bread, but you can make or buy a gluten-free bread or stuffing mix, or like a gluten-free cornbread or rice or quinoa or a different grain for like a delicious stuffing alternative. And you just want to be aware, once again, that the broth that we're using is also gluten-free. Similarly, gluten-free gravy, make it using gluten-free flour or cornstarch. But if you like the pre-made one, then just make sure it's labeled gluten-free. A lot of sides are traditionally gluten-free, right? Like potatoes or vegetables or cranberry sauce or sweet potato dishes. And then for desserts, if you're wanting to use something baked using a gluten-free flour.
So here's a bunch of pictures of just common ingredients and products that we would use for Thanksgiving. So, which ones do we, happen to have gluten in them and which ones do not? I think we go to the next slide, right?
Well,
Go back. I can go back. Sorry. So obviously we start with like the cranberry sauce, like a ocean spray that's going to be gluten free. There's nothing thicken. You don't use a thickener for that. You can also use fresh cranberries and make your own, which I love to do. It's very easy. Mashed potatoes, if they're homemade from scratch, tend to be gluten free. Obviously, you always want to check other ingredients in the mashed potatoes if you're not the one making it. If you're going to a family, friends. Obviously, stovetop, that's like your mainstream stuffing mix that's going to made with regular bread that's made with wheat. A lot of the cream of chicken soups are thickened with flour. The Campbell's is. There is actually a Campbell's gluten-free one. I think I've seen. I don't know if I haven't seen it in the stores, but I think I've heard there is one they make. But there are other brands of mushroom cream of chicken soups that are gluten-free. Just you have to look for those. Canned corn, that's going to be typically no other ingredients are going to be in that, gluten-free. The McCormick gravy, which Nissim mentioned, is going to have typically a type of a wheat starch or a thickener that's made with gluten. Your regular cornbread is going to have gluten in it, but obviously there's tons of regular box gluten-free cornbread mixes you can get from Trader Joe's or from your regular grocery stores. I see them all the time. Turkeys, you just want to be careful. I recommend fresh turkeys. Some of the frozen turkeys can have a brine already in them. So you want to check if that brine or if there's a broth that's added, what's in that. So that's my only thing with frozen. Fresh have nothing added. So I always recommend getting the fresh turkeys. With using like the cubes, the bouillon cubes, the Knorr, check to make sure that it is gluten-free. That brand particularly is not. The chicken broths, a lot of them are Trader Joe's is, and there's a lot of other brands in other grocery stores that have gluten-free, but there are some that can have gluten in them. So again, read the ingredient list label. So for instance, gravy, your regular, here we go, McCormick gravy in the back, the first ingredient is wheat flour. So we want to avoid that gravy mix and just make sure if you are going to have gravy at someone's house, ask where they got it or if they're making it homemade, how are they thickening it? But there are lots of ways to make gluten-free gravy using cornstarch. You can use, there is a McCormick gluten-free one. There's a Primal Kitchen has one. So there's a bunch of different brands that you can find that are gluten-free. If you make it from scratch, you can use cornstarch or a gluten-free flour mix. Broths and bouillons is where sometimes you gotta really be careful with because there tend to be a lot of wheat and a lot of those mainstream broths or bouillons. But again, there are a lot of gluten-free brands out there. Swanson's for broths, Knorr has one. So there's a bunch of different Kettle and Fire. Sam's, as I said, Trader Joe's has a lot of different, there are great ones out there that you can find, but you just, again, don't assume that they have no gluten in them. Soups, as I mentioned before, the Campbell's cream of chicken, cream of mushroom does have gluten in it, but here are some gluten-free alternative soups, and you don't always have to use cream of chicken. You can use you can use tomato soups or butternut squash soups or other condensed soups, change up the recipes, but there are some gluten-free ones that are out there. And also in terms of, this also mentions the onions, you do the green bean casserole and you use the soup. Well, they do have actually also gluten-free crispy onions. I've seen it like Whole Foods that you can use, but the regular ones are not gluten-free. Stuffing again, there's tons. Oh my God, nowadays I see there's like at Whole Foods, at Trader Joe's, you can get lots of different prepared packaged stuffing mixes that are gluten-free. But again, the main one that you would get that Stouffer's is not gluten-free. But again, or you make from scratch. I do a cornbread stuffing every year. I just make the cornbread a gluten-free one, and then I put all my vegetables and I use a gluten-free broth and it comes out really great. And then we can go on next slide. As for cornbread too, as I mentioned, there's a lot of different mixes, Bob's Red Mill, King Arthur, Krusty's, Pamela's, Trader Joe's has one, or you can also make cornbread from scratch using cornmeal and gluten-free flour. There's lots of different recipes you can find for making homemade gluten-free cornbread too. But your regular cornbread, even though it's cornbread, you think cornbread, cornmeal, corn is gluten-free, but again, it always usually has a wheat flour added to that mix. Gluten-free baking. So very easy. There's so many great things out there, ingredients out there that you can make gluten-free, desserts from. So you can use a great gluten-free all-purpose flours. I love using Bob's Red Mill, the 1-to-1. That's my favorite by far flour to use to replace, like, say you have a traditional recipe that's been handed down for whatever it is. You can use that to replace the all-purpose flour in that for using the 1-to-1 flour. It's a really, really great flour, and I feel like it's easy to buy everywhere. I see it all the time. And then there's also pies are obviously very, very popular. If you don't want to start making your own pie crust, there are a lot of gluten-free frozen pie crusts you can buy. Even Trader Joe's has one, Whole Foods. You can buy also the gluten-free graham cracker crusts and just, make your own filling with, if you wanted to make a French silk pie or pumpkin pie, pecan pies, they're very easy to make gluten-free.
And I love, Vicky, your suggestions for other tricks. I didn't know if you wanted to say anything about them, like using.
Oh yeah. So let's see, other tricks. Let's see here. What did I say here? sometimes, with using, if you're like, for instance, if you are using like a recipe like a regular gluten containing recipe, sometimes adding an extra egg can help with like the moisture. Sometimes using butter instead of oil can also help with flavor. But it's also good to experiment beforehand, like, and kind of, because sometimes gluten-free baking can be tricky. I like to follow recipes for gluten-free baking or like, because sometimes, because the flours don't have that gluten, the gluten is what provides that structure in a lot of products. For baking purposes, you don't need the structure as much as you would for like a bread. So the gluten-free breads can be trickier. However, there are a lot of tricks. You can use xanthan gum. As we said here, you can use milk instead of water. I always like to bring all ingredients to room temperature, and that's typical for all baking. That really helps with, I think, the final outcome of the product too.
So sort of similar to Thanksgiving, some of the other tricks and tips that we think about. One is plan ahead. And if you're hosting, communicate with your guests in advance to determine their dietary restrictions and preferences. If you're going to someone else's house, talking to them in advance to sort of see what can you do to make things gluten-free and make it sort of an easier time for your family or for your children. Cooking together can be really fun. It's another one of those traditions where you can just make it natural that, gluten-free pumpkin pie or that gluten-free whatever is like our family's tradition. And then labeling dishes is really helpful in general. And it doesn't have to be just about gluten so that people don't always feel sort of left out. It could be like gluten-free, dairy-free, or it can be like vegetarian or, whatever it is that your guests or the people that may feel most comfortable with. Think about creative ways to present your dishes, like mashed potatoes in individual mason jars or a gluten-free dessert bar with various sweet treats. And sometimes, especially if you're in a situation where it might feel like, oh, I don't have as many gluten-free options, when they're in these really cute, beautiful containers, they're just even more attractive and feel more fun. Think about games and activities to make the day more fun. So once again, like outside of the food box, what are the other things that we can do that feels traditional? And then expressing gratitude. Because as we said before, holidays aren't just about the food, but it's also just about being grateful for things that we're thankful for. For people who are gluten-free, especially for children and for others, sometimes it helps to go first before any cross-contamination can happen, if that's at risk. Separate serving stations for gluten-containing and gluten-free, especially when you're worried about somebody double dipping. Contributing your own gluten-free dishes. Color coding serving bowls or utensils can help. Talking to your host ahead of the event. Splitting grocery shopping for the big day into multiple runs. I don't know, Vicky, if you want to add anything else here for other tips and tricks that you usually think about.
I mean, I just think if you're going to someone's house, definitely talk to them about it, because it is important, obviously, that you eat gluten-free. So find out what they're serving, find out what they're, maybe some of their dishes are going to be gluten-free. But I think we already said, bring something. I always bring something, whether it be like a couple. I like to cook, so a couple sides and like always a dessert. But I think that's really important too, is just knowing that at least there's some stuff out there that, is safe and gluten-free, is really important too. But I think the biggest thing here is just communicate with family or friends, about your preference, your dietary, restriction, and just, you don't want it to be too stressful during, especially for kids. And I think with kids, just making sure that, not a lot of kids aren't going to eat everything that's even on the Thanksgiving, traditions anyway, but know what your child likes, and maybe just bring that too. So they know that we know that they're going to, you're comfortable, like that they're going to eat something and be happy. But a lot of the kids are, not really interested as much in the food, but just being there and having fun with other family and friends anyway. So, but it is important to obviously have those foods available to them too.
I'm gonna stop sharing. That sort of concludes. Thank you for that, by the way, Vicki, because I think completely agree. Communication and helping our children feel comfortable is so important. We wanted to kind of that concludes our formal presentation, but we wanted to sort of open things up for questions, for comments, for ideas. If anybody